Is there a problem here? Old man? The voice was sharp, laced with the unknown. Confidence of a man who had never been. Truly tested. Lieutenant Commander. Price, all crisp uniform and polished. Ambition stood with his hands on his hips, glaring down at the elderly gentleman who was taking a moment to read the ingredients on a can of soup in the base exchange. The old man, clad in worn jeans and a faded Navy veteran cap, seemed to shrink under the officer's accusatory gaze. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy of age. His hands nodded with arthritis, but his eyes, when he finally looked up, why, surprisingly clear and calm. He didn't appear startled or intimidated, merely observant. This placid reaction seemed to pour fuel on the fire. Price's impatience. I asked you a question. You're holding up the entire aisle. People have places to be. This is a library. The old man, whose name was Silas, placed a can of soup back on the shelf with a soft click. He offered a small apologetic nod. My apologies, Commander. I was just deciding. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that carried a hint of a southern drawl, weathered by time, but steady. He made no move to scurry away, instead meeting the officer's glare with a placid stillness that was more unnerving to Price than any angry retort would have been. It felt like a challenge, a quiet refusal to be cowed. Price's jaw tightened. He was a man on the rise, recently promoted, and he saw disrespect in every shadow, a threat to his authority around every corner. This old civilian, likely some forgotten relic who'd spent 2 years on a supply ship 50 years ago, was now his project for the afternoon. He would be made an example of, deciding it's a can of soup, not a career choice. Some of us have actual duties to attend to on this base. What's your business here? Anyway, this exchange is for active duty personnel and their dependents, not for ancient mariners to wander around and clog up the works. He gestured dismissively at Silas's hat. I'm sure your service was very adequate, but that doesn't give you a free pass to inconvenience the real Navy. The barb, intended to sting, seemed to glance off Silas without effect. He simply adjusted the brim of his cap, the fabric worn thin over the embroidered anchor. I have an ID card, Commander. I'm permitted to be here. His calmness was a wall. Price couldn't seem to scale, and it was making him furious. A few shoppers, mostly young sailors and their spouses, had begun to notice the confrontation. They slowed their carts, pretending to browse nearby shelves, their curiosity piqued by the officer's loud, aggressive tone and the old man's resolute silence. Price was aware of the audience, and it emboldened him. He would show these young sailors what command presence looked like. He would demonstrate that standards were to be maintained, that even the smallest infraction would not be tolerated under his watch. An ID card? Let me see it, he demanded, holding out his hand with an imperious snap. Silas sighed, a soft exhalation of breath that spoke of infinite patience, and reached into the pocket of his worn leather wallet. He carefully extracted a standard government-issued veteran identification card and handed it over. Price snatched it from his fingers, his eyes scanning it with theatrical suspicion. He was looking for a flaw, an expiration date, any excuse to escalate. Finding none, he sneered, flipping the card back at Silas. Fine, it's valid. That just means you're technically allowed to be here. It doesn't mean you own the place. Frankly, I'm tired of seeing your type hanging around. You come here to relive some long-lost glory days that probably weren't that glorious to begin with. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, insulting hiss. What did you really do? Old man, push papers? Peel potatoes? I bet you haven't been on a ship in 50 Years. But you wear that hat like you single-handedly won a war. The cruelty was deliberate, designed to humiliate, to break the old man's infuriating composure. Silas's expression didn't change, but a deep weariness settled into his eyes. He had seen this brand of arrogance before in young men who mistook rank for wisdom and authority, for honor. He had seen it in boot camp, on ships, and in far more dangerous places in a naval base commissary. He slowly put his ID back in his wallet and turned to leave, deciding the soup wasn't worth the trouble. Price, however, wasn't finished. He stepped in front of Silas, blocking his path. I'm not done with you. I think you're a loiterer. I'm ordering you to leave the exchange now and don't let me see you around here again. The overt command, the public humiliation finally caused a ripple in the quiet atmosphere. A stocky, Master Chief Petty Officer who had been observing from the end of the aisle decided he'd seen enough. With over 25 years of service, MCPO Davies had a finely tuned sense for when a situation was about to cross a line. He'd seen 1,000 young, ambitious officers like Price, and he knew the damage they could do when their ego was at the helm. He approached the scene with a calm, non-threatening stride, his presence alone a testament to quiet authority. "Commander Price, sir," he said, his voice respectful but firm. "Is there a problem I can help with?" Price turned, annoyed by the interruption. "It's handled, Master Chief. This man was causing a disturbance, and I've ordered him to leave the base." Davies' eyes flickered to Silas, who stood waiting with the patience of a mountain. The Master Chief didn't see a troublemaker. He saw an old sailor, maybe a grandfather, being needlessly harassed. He saw a stillness in the old man's posture that spoke not of weakness, but of immense control. "With all due respect, sir, he doesn't seem to be causing a disturbance now. Perhaps we can just de-escalate." Price's face flushed with anger. The Master Chief's intervention was a public challenge to his authority. "Are you questioning my order, Master Chief? I am the senior officer here. This man is leaving." End of discussion. Just as Price's voice rose again, a new presence entered the aisle. The ambient chatter of the exchange seemed to quiet, and a path cleared as if by an invisible force. Admiral Thompson, the base commander, strode into view, his aide, a young lieutenant, trailing a respectful 2 paces behind. The Admiral was a tall, imposing man with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. He had been on his way to his car when his aide had pointed out the commotion. He took in the scene in an instant, a red-faced lieutenant commander puffing out his chest, a concerned Master Chief standing his ground, a small crowd of onlookers, and a calm, elderly man at the center of it all. Price's arrogance evaporated like morning mist, replaced by a cold dread. He snapped to attention, his salute crisp and panicked. "Admiral, sir." "Good afternoon, sir." Admiral Thompson's gaze swept over him with glacial indifference before settling on Silas. He walked directly past the trembling LCDR and stopped in front of the old veteran. He studied the man's face, the lines etched by time and sun, the quiet dignity in his bearing. There was something profoundly familiar in the way the man held himself, a kind of disciplined repose that you didn't learn in a kitchen or behind a desk. He looked at the worn Navy veteran cap, then back into Silas's clear eyes. "Sailor," the Admiral began, his voice devoid of any condescension, filled only with a quiet, professional respect. "I sincerely apologize for my officer's behavior. It is not the standard we uphold." Price flinched as if struck. The Admiral hadn't even acknowledged his presence. Beyond a passing glance, he was speaking to the old man as an equal, Thompson continued, his focus entirely on Silas. My name is Admiral Thompson. May I ask your name and what unit you served with? The question was gentle, an invitation, not a demand. Silas met his gaze. Silas came. Sir, it's been a long time. I was with the underwater demolition teams, back before they were cold seals. The Master Chief's eyebrows shot up. The UDTs were the stuff of legend, the forefathers of naval special warfare. Price, standing frozen in a half-forgotten embrace, felt a new wave of nausea. This was getting worse. The Admiral nodded slowly, a flicker of deep recognition in his eyes. He knew the history. He revered it. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture he found almost impossible to believe. He had one more question, the one that would confirm the incredible, terrifying suspicion growing in his mind. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone one might use in a holy place. Mr. Payne, Silas, did you have a call sign? For the first time, a shadow of an old memory crossed Silas's face. He hesitated, not from uncertainty, but as if weighing the consequence of uttering a name he had buried for half a century. Then, with a simple, direct look into the Admiral's eyes, he spoke the words that would shatter the world of everyone present. They call me Ghost 5, sir. The name landed in the sudden profound silence of the aisle like a depth charge. Ghost 5, to Lieutenant Commander Price, it meant nothing, but to Admiral Thompson, it meant everything. The Admiral's face, tanned and weathered by a life at sea, went stark white. His jaw fell slack, and he took a shaky, involuntary step backward, his professional composure completely shattered. The aide behind him let out an audible gasp, his hand flying to his mouth. Master Chief Davies' eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure unadulterated, or as if he were staring at a figure who had just stepped out of Scripture. Ghost 5, the Admiral whispered, the words catching in his throat. His voice was filled with a reverence that bordered on holy terror. He stared at Silas, not as an old man, but as a living ghost, a myth made flesh. Price, utterly bewildered by the reaction, could only stammer, Sir, what is it? What's a Ghost 5? The Admiral turned his head slowly, his eyes now burning with a cold, furious fire, locking on to Price. The transition was terrifying. The respectful he showed Silas was replaced by an anger so profound it was silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet deadliness in his tone was more frightening than any shout. Commander, he said, each word a chip of ice. You have the unmitigated gall to ask me what a Ghost 5 is after what you just did. The Admiral took a step toward Price, who instinctively shrank back. Let me educate you, Commander, since you clearly slept through every history and ethics lesson at the Academy. Ghost Team was a 5-man SEAL element commissioned for Operation Nightfall in the winter of 1968. It was a black operation, so deep and so secret that most of the Joint Chiefs weren't even read into it. Their mission was to halo jump behind the Iron Curtain and destroy a new type of Soviet submarine guidance system. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the now petrified Price. Their insertion was compromised. The welcome party was an entire Spetsnaz division. For members of Ghost Team were killed in the initial contact. Only one survived. He pointed a trembling finger at Silas. Ghost 5. For 23 days, he was the only friendly asset in a territory the size of Delaware, hunted by the best trackers. The Soviet Union had, he not only evaded the mole, but he continued the mission. Alone, he found the target, destroyed it, and then with no support and no exfil route, He walked 200 m through frozen wilderness to the Turkish border. The Admiral's voice grew thick with emotion. He is listed as killed in action. His file is sealed under the highest classification of national security. The story of Ghost 5 is a legend they tell at Bud OS, a ghost story to inspire trainees to show them the absolute limit of human endurance and courage. We were told he died on that mountain. A hero. We had no idea he made it out. No idea he was still alive. He finally looked back at Silas, his eyes filled with tears. This man's Medal of Honor citation is sealed in a vault at the Pentagon because the mission is technically still classified. You didn't just disrespect a veteran, Commander. You just humiliated a living monument. The weight of the Admiral's words descended upon Lieutenant Commander Price like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs. He stared at Silas, the quiet old man with the calm eyes, and saw something else. Entirely, he saw a man who had walked through hell and come out the other side. He saw the embodiment of every creed he had ever recited, every ideal he had pretended to uphold. The arrogance, the ambition, the petty tyranny, it all curdled into a thick, choking shame that burned in his throat. He felt small, insignificant, a child who had been playing with his father's gun and had just pointed it at a god. The world tilted on its axis. The man he had called an old-timer and a wannabe was a hero of such magnitude that the Admiral himself spoke his call sign with trembling reverence. The silence in the aisle was now absolute, broken only by the distant hum of a freezer case. The young sailors who had been watching were now standing ramrod straight, their faces a mixture of shock and profound respect. They were no longer watching a confrontation. They were witnessing history. Admiral Thompson, recovering his composure, turned to the master. Chief, his voice was firm, an order wrapped in the deepest respect. Master, Chief Davies, please escort Mr. Kane to my personal office. See that he gets a hot coffee, a comfortable chair, and anything else he requires. He is to be treated as our guest of honor. The Master Chief, his own eyes misty, nodded crisply. Aye, Admiral. He approached Silas, but instead of guiding him, he simply said, Sir, if you'll follow me. As Davies and Silas began to walk away, the Admiral's full, undivided, and terrifying attention returned to Price. Commander, he said, his voice dropping back to that lethally quiet register, you will remain here. Then you will report to my aide, who will escort you to the base legal office. You will surrender your command at CIN. You will then be confined to your quarters, pending a full review of your conduct and fitness of command. But your punishment is just beginning. Your redemption, if it is even possible, will start tomorrow. You will be reassigned. You will spend the next year in the basement of the Naval History and Heritage Command, archiving the stories of the men you so clearly failed to comprehend. You will read every after-action report from Korea and Vietnam. You will learn their names. You will learn what they sacrificed. You will learn the meaning of the uniform you wear. As Silas passed by the frozen, ashen-faced lieutenant commander, he paused for a moment. He looked at the young officer, and in his eyes there was no anger, no triumph, only a deep, profound pity. He turned his head toward the Admiral, who was still glaring at Price. "He's just a boy, Admiral," Silas said, his voice calm and forgiving, full of more vinegar than sense. "He'll learn." With that final quiet pronouncement, the living legend walked away, leaving behind a shattered officer and a lesson in humility that would echo across the base for years to come. Price finally looked up, his eyes meeting the Admiral's. For the first time in his life, he was truly afraid, not of punishment, but of the vast, honorable world he had just discovered he knew nothing about. His journey was just